Right. One of the things we've noticed is that while during COVID there was a lot of respect for the carers, the nurses, and we fully appreciated them. Now that COVID or the lockdown is over, people seem to be rushing back to their old ways, which is a bit of a worry. And COVID has shown up, or that society is sort of UK society has a whole load of inequalities which needs to be addressed. And we need to keep that feeling of people being valued and not let go of it just because things are returning to normal. We felt that the kindness people show to each other, sort of on a neighbourly basis, you know, you talk to during lockdown and whatnot, everybody's talk to everybody else, people that you don't know, you go walk along the street and people talk to each other. There's a sort of sense of community that wasn't there before, which hopefully we could keep. Politicians tend to have a lot of rhetoric and then forget it as soon as it's convenient. Whereas if we continued with talking to our neighbour and that friendship round about us and allow it to percolate outwards, we might keep that sense of sort of make sure that that appreciation of every single person continues in the way it was before. And I think that was the gist of what we said. Please add if I've left anything out. So there you go.
Thanks very much, Barbara. Have we got room number 2, wherever that is?
Don't know.
I don't know what room breakout number was.
You were in 2, Jim.
Oh, that's me then.
That's you.
Okay.
Yeah, the room numbers are in the chat and who led each room.
Ah.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, we began by looking at and sharing thoughts on question 4. And it was largely, in fact, perhaps wholly within the context of climate change, as indeed was Pope Francis's reflection there. And it sort of led from a sharing of how people perhaps early on in an understanding, a growing awareness of climate change, have moved from a sort of casual awareness that it was there, perhaps not being moved by it, perhaps complacent. And the night of perhaps lack of motivation, moving to the dawn of understanding, leading in turn to action, was essentially overarching nature of the comments that were shared. And in different ways, people have moved from complacency to action, but not everybody has. And there is the challenge for people like ourselves, who perhaps we could all be described as activists, when you're faced with people who are climate change deniers, or who are just, in a material sense, perhaps too comfortable in their own lives to want to be bothered about it, to want to think about it. And also perhaps some people who are frozen by it, they're overwhelmed by the enormity of the very nature of it. and how difficult it can be to try and help them have a Damascus Road moment so that they can move from the night and see the day, which led us into comments around action itself. And a recurring theme was the importance, the viability, should we say, of small steps, of doing small things. One member of the group, and I'm afraid I missed the quote. It's a quote I've heard before, but I missed who originally said it. I don't know whether, Janet, you could remind us. Do small things with love.
That's right.
Do you know where the quote comes from?
I think it was St. Teresa of Calcutta when she was setting up a centre in Calcutta initially, because she was overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem. And she realised she had to do small steps, but with great love.
Yeah.
She's right.
So, and an extension of that thinking was suggested about engaging with people on the issue, but perhaps just one person at a time. Comment was made that part of perhaps the difficulty for those who are concerned about climate change is the plethora of campaigns, the sheer number of different organisations, all more or less campaigning for the same thing. It certainly struck a chord with me. That's something that we here at home get a little bit wound up about. You've got so many different organisations campaigning on the same thing. And an interesting observation was made by describing Greta Thunberg as a modern day prophetess, that she lives the life of a prophetess. Something I certainly agree with there. So we then moved on, having probably taken up more than half of our time on question 4, to question 5, the fruits of lockdown. And there was a number of interesting experience there. Help being received from people that you perhaps were aware of, might even have known slightly, but wouldn't necessarily have previously described them as friends, who moved into a situation of making regular contact and doing a lot to help, which in turn developed a relationship from perhaps acquaintance to friendship. Similar stories to that, one of them resulting in a neighbourhood helpline being established. And also a volunteer at a food bank was saying that more recently demand has increased, but so have the donations. These are all fruits of the lockdown. And more personally, I don't mean personally for me, this is for one other person, was the, as it were, enforced slowing down caused by lockdown. Having to move away from busy to perhaps a more contemplative situation, to be able to be, to discover what God wanted of us as individuals, as opposed to just getting out there and doing what we thought was necessary. There's an old jokey saying, isn't there, that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. We just think that you have to be doing something. I forget whether it's Nelson Mandela or Oscar Romero, but one of my heroes anyway, has a saying, doesn't it? Aspire not to have more, but to be more.
That's right.
Romero.
That was
Thank
Romero.
you. And one person observed that one of the fruits of lockdown was actually coming to tonight's session, joining the assembly. So the Lord does indeed work in mysterious ways. We didn't really have time to do much sharing at all on question 6, but the important observation was made in the closing seconds about the degree of suffering that families have gone through as a result of the pandemic. Not just literally physical suffering and bereavement, but also an increase in poverty. People have lost jobs, fuel poverty, and of course, bringing it right up to date, the imminent loss of the universal credit uplift and with the ramifications that that's going to have.
Okay, thanks very much, Jim. That was great. Room 3 is Chris, please.
Yep. We started with question 4, and the first comment was that darkness was like unawareness of a subject, and as you began to learn things, it was like another member of the group was distressed by how few people realize how late it is, how far into the climate crisis we are. It is now, and even family members were not really on board with that. Somebody else said that a lot of it doesn't really impinge on our daily life, and that's because we don't see too much of it around us in the country, plenty on the media. But change, doing even small things, can begin to improve it. Someone else said that people are scared and feel powerless. Another member said many years ago they'd attended a climate change weekend with the local Anglican church with a link to Magdeburg in Germany, but now feels that it's not just climate, there are so many other things, and the volcano that's going off in La Palma at the moment seems to be the molten mass of climate, and quoted the butterfly flapping its wings having an effect across the world. So if something as small as that can happen, we can all do a bit. Prince Charles got a mention because 40 years ago he was talking about the environment. People tended to call him a crank back then, but the warning was there, and I suspect Attenborough was on board back then as well. But as somebody else commented, it wasn't seen as a proper threat because there was nuclear war around, and that's what we all thought was going to happen back in the 80s. And finally, on number 4, the connection with Laudato Si. There are other threats there, including poverty. So we moved on to number 5, and a couple of people started by talking about their own family situation with COVID. Someone who had a son currently having COVID is improving, but when he spoke to his son on FaceTime, he put a mask on, and that was a sense of humour bit that the Pope spoke about. And someone else had a grandchild aged 12, just getting over it, beginning to appreciate the small things. Somebody spoke about relationships, particularly human touch, and how they'd shaken hands today for the first time in 18 months, and then realised how much they'd missed touch and hugging. Someone had been to Mass for the first time physically last weekend, and a fellow parishioner had stroked their beard. An interesting example of touch. And somebody was going to hug a friend, but realised the friend had MS, and then stepped back for fear of what might happen to the friend. We've missed so many simple things. Other examples, going to the hairdresser. Well, it's a different form of touch, but it's something that makes you feel better. And someone said, we have become more adaptable. We had a limited time on number 6. someone remarked that they had singing back in their church, and it's tremendous to have it back. But the community is not complete, not through dying, but through failing to come together. It's still a big loss. And someone added that there are a lot of families missing, and that means very few children. We need to get the families back. And families have suffered with having to do homeschooling, losing jobs. I think the final comment we had was there's a blurred identity with education, teaching things that not all parents agreed with. So during homeschooling, what have some children been taught? Different messages that they wouldn't have got in the classroom. That's it.
Great, Chris. You got through a lot in the time. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I think Phil's next, please.
Yeah, thanks very much. We didn't cover quite as much as that. We started talking about this idea of awareness in question 4 and shared our own experiences of becoming aware and how that's affected us and makes us who we are today. A couple of points there were about mission in the church, a greater awareness of mission. And Ray said something that made something to me, that to intentionally immerse yourself into the situation rather than just sort of go along with it. There comes a moment when you intentionally immerse yourself, and I like that. We mentioned Pope Francis, his background, how he wrote this. Did he get help from? Does he consult with people from outside the Catholic Church? I think he does, certainly. I think he refers to a number of people, a number of published material about that. We shared about, Steve shared about Naomi Klein, a very well-known writer on climate issues, as being part of that. And also fear, the COVID crisis, when it first, the fear that came. And then we also mentioned ecumenical, working with people of other faiths and none in our own communities. We were talking about the people on the periphery. This goes back to, hello, sorry. The second question about those people on the edge of the crisis, people on the periphery of society. This is where we will find, this is what Francis tells us, this is where we'll find solutions. We'll be able to see more clearly. And how do we find those people in our societies today? And one thing was mentioned about Laudato Si is not, it's not a climate or an environmental encyclical, it's a social encyclical. It's about how do we work with all the people, as well as how do we change about our own personal ecological conversions is a much wider, broader thing than just dealing with the climate or environmental issues. One thing from me, I don't know what your reactions have been to, I didn't mention this, but these people, everyone queuing up for petrol and petrol stations running out, and it's how the media have reported this, and then it seems it's just a panic driven, and the back of that is this selfishness that is in society, that lack of thinking about other people who may really need that petrol. I say this because when I was at Mass on Sunday, at the end of Mass, one of our colleagues, she said, I've managed to fill my car up. You better go and fill yours up. And you know, I don't need to go and fill it up. I've still got half a tank of petrol. I'm not going anywhere. But this idea that, you know, we've all got to look after ourselves rather than think of other people. To me, it's ingrained in our way of living, and that's got to change as well. Anyway, that's enough from me. Ray and Steve, if I've missed anything, and Roberta, please let me know.
Great. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you. I'm sure we've all been thinking a lot of the similar thoughts as well, especially about the petrol. I think I'm next. It was interesting to discover that one of our group, Kathy, had actually studied atmospheric physics in the 1970s. So that was already a lot of this knowledge was actually in the scientific area anyway. Another, Susan, had done the Laudato Si course, and that was a great experience for her, and she learned so much about it. It's actually spurred her into action. And we were talking about really bringing home awareness of the sort of consequences of what's happening, but certainly on the course, meeting people from other countries, the Philippines, other places where actually these things are actually taking place here and now. We're a little bit insulated from those things in some ways here. About something else mentioned, fear. I think that fear is a factor, and it perhaps it feeds our denial, you know, not really admitting, you know, what's really happening, or being open to understanding what's really happening. And then people are taking action or becoming more aware, I think, personally, but just frustration about government inaction, that they're not really getting down to taking measures and really pushing things to actually make a response. So yes, so it was mainly focusing on number 4. Our group was. We didn't get it much further than that. So the final one is Anna, please.
Unmute, Anna.
Hey?
She needs to unmute.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we didn't have one member had the questions in front of her, but we didn't all have them, which was a bit of a disadvantage. However, we highlighted the differences. First of all, the problems, and lots of what has been said already has been covered, but people were in lots of powerless situations. For instance, children having to stay at home, and then some families didn't have food, they didn't have computers, there was no place for the children to play, and if the children were ill, then you couldn't call on relatives. So elderly people were marooned in their houses. And then people couldn't see families, they couldn't visit families, couldn't visit anyone. And then people in hospitals, relatives in hospitals couldn't be visited, and funerals were hardly taking place. And then there were very small numbers. So there was a lot of support missing everywhere, and it did highlight all those problems. And then mental health problems as well. A number of people were really stressed, and there weren't many people around that they could talk to about that. People, and on the other hand, I think it highlighted the climate change as well, because the air was cleaner in different ways. The air was cleaner, fewer people were on the road. So it was a time when people could be aware that the difference pollution makes to people, and also that COVID probably happened as a result of climate change, but we didn't go into how that happened. And then looking at the fruits of some of the good things that happened, people set up WhatsApp groups. There was a lot of kindness around. There were food banks. There was more community. and there was more time. People had more time and more space, and there was greater appreciation of prayer and being able, because churches were closed, people were able to go from place to place and experience church, experience mass in different places. So that was all very interesting. And also the vaccines, as soon as they came, then there was new hope around. The problem about the problems that it did highlight, like homelessness and mental health and poverty, especially with the £20 being taken from people tomorrow or the next day. The politicians speak positively, but it's very hard to get our message across for the people in society who don't have a voice and who are still left out and are still suffering. And there's a huge gulf, and it has highlighted that gulf, that space and that lack. And how do we, help? What do we do about it? How can we take action to highlight people who have a voice, to highlight these problems so that these people are helped? That's kind of more or less. Thank you. If anybody wants to say anything from the group, please feel free.
Great, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you, all the groups. Obviously, there's been a lot of very good reflection and conversation and sharing going on, which chimes across all the groups, really. We're kind of running out of time, but obviously I think tonight's session has taken us into looking around the world, looking around ourselves, looking at things that have happened. And tomorrow we'll be going a bit further. Barbara's leading the session tomorrow on judging how we perhaps assess those things a bit more. And I'm sure that will take us further into the area that we're looking at in our assemblies this week. So thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to, hopefully you'll come back again tomorrow and we go further.